We're standing by this afternoon to take you to a news conference with the Chief Executive of the Australian Energy Market Operator, Daniel Westerman. It comes after AEMO released its what's known as an integrated system plan, which forecasts electricity generation for the next 3 decades. Our business editor, Ross Greenwood, is with me now. Ross, this is critical for the future competitiveness of business as well, isn't it?
Oh, it really is, because it's all about the way in which energy is going to be generated into the future. It's about the cost of that electricity, and it's also about the ability for that electricity to be there always when industry needs it, because that creates jobs and economic prosperity for Australia. Now, from this today, I broke down one of their charts just to give people a bit of an illustration as to the way AEMO is forecasting Australia's electricity generation will happen over the next 20 years. So we're taking the changes from 2022-23 or 23-24 out until 2043. And what you can see is right now, coal generates 16.7%, that black coal, brown coal. By that time, in 20 years' time, it will be zero. In fact, by 10 years' time, it will be almost negligible. Gas, you can see here, also drops from 9.7% to 3.8%. Hydro, despite Snowy 2.0, drops from 5.4 to 2.4%. The big changes are wind and solar, as you can see here, up from 9% to more than 20%, from 6.6% to 16.7%. Then on top of that also, what you can see here is storage. In other words, battery storage. It might be pumped hydro schemes are going to be more important, from 2.7 to 17.5%. And also, this is distributed PV, which I've got to say is rooftop solar. You can see that rises from 16.7 to more than 20%. But the important aspect of that, Kieran, is that dispatchable power, in other words, power that's always on, which is what industry needs, will drop from 33% currently because of the lack of coal and the drop in particular, gas, to 18.6%. And that's the thing that industry might be concerned about, and indeed puts enormous pressure on the battery rollout in Australia, and then obviously quite clearly the transmission lines, of which there's suggested to be $10 billion of investment to make certain that there is sufficient electricity in the places that Australia needs it.
And what does it say then about the future of industry in Australia?
Well, the question for many of the big energy users in Australia right now, with even the outages we've had this year, or the threatened outages, to brick makers, the question is whether they can make their products cheaper overseas and import to Australia. It goes to our steelworks, it goes to aluminium producers, to alumina producers. But then even if you think about the processing of the thing that we need to make all those batteries is lithium. Now, to actually process lithium takes enormous amounts of electricity. And so to be competitive, to be able to do that, notwithstanding that we've got some of the biggest mines in the world, we still need the electricity to be able to turn it into the materials that can therefore make the batteries. And so you can see right throughout our community, it is about the ability to have cheap and available electricity that is going to be key. But as you say, we'll hear from Daniel Westerman, the Chief Executive of AEMO, very, very shortly.
Now, while the US and Europe worry about recession, our economy, Ross, in broader terms, it's still showing signs of a significant boom.
Well, it really is. I've got to tell you, this is the amazing thing. Everybody's talking about economic downturns and recessions, certainly in the United States and in Europe. Now, the European Central Bank overnight has had a conference at which it had Christine Lagarde, the head of the ECB, plus also Jerome Powell, who's the boss of the Federal Reserve in the United States. Just have a little listen, because he basically says, all but says, he would prefer to have the US go into recession if that meant that he could actually quell inflation, which gives some almost history to what Paul Keating said about the recession we had to have. Had a listen.
We're very strongly committed to using our tools to get inflation to come down. The way to do that is to slow down growth, ideally keep it positive, and as I mentioned, supply and demand get back into balance. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. Is there a risk that we would go too far? Certainly there's a risk. But I wouldn't agree that it's the biggest risk to the economy. I think that, the bigger mistake to make, let's put it that way, would be to fail to restore price stability.
So in other words, Kieran, he's saying that the risk of inflation is a bigger risk than an economic downturn in the short term, which is a big, big call for a central banker to make. But here in Australia, as we point out, we show no signs of that. In fact, the place is booming. And I'll show you a couple of stats that came out today. One of those is credit growth. Now, credit growth in Australia shows a healthy economy. This is what's happened over the past year. Private sector credit is up by 9%, more than the 13-year high. Housing credit hasn't stopped. It's kept on going, even in the past month as interest rates have risen. And again, today there's been big interest rate rises in fixed rate loans, in particular from the Commonwealth Bank. Business credit in the past 12 months up by 12.9%. But it goes on from there. We go even to job vacancies. Now, generally, if your economy's no good, people don't want to employ. Right now, have a look at this. In May this year, there is some 480,000 positions up for grabs. That's a record, up by 13.8% over the past year. And indeed, there's 58,000 jobs, new jobs, that have come up on those sites, according to the Bureau of Statistics, in just the past month. So this is not a sign of a slowing economy. It's a sign of a booming economy. But at some stage, higher interest rates will catch up with Australia. There's no doubt we seem to be about 6 to 8 months behind other parts of the world.
Ross, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.